Three brides came to the Crow Ranch. Three brides fled before 7 sunsets passed. The town of Redstone Valley whispered that Elias Crow, the Half-Apache rancher with eyes like winter storms, was cursed to live alone. They said his blood was too mixed, his silence too deep, his land too unforgiving. They said no woman could survive him. They were wrong. Hannah Brooks would prove them all wrong. But first, she had to survive the longest 7 days of her life. If you're ready to discover how one woman shattered every expectation and built a home where others saw only wilderness, stay with me until the end. And when you finish, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The stagecoach rattled into Redstone Valley on a Tuesday afternoon, wheels grinding against frozen earth, and every soul on Main Street stopped what they were doing to watch. They always watched when a coach arrived. Not because visitors were rare, though they were, but because everyone in town knew what this particular coach carried. Another bride for Elias Crow. Martha Chen paused mid-sweep outside her boarding house, broom handle gripped tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Sheriff Tom Garrett stepped out from his office, thumbs hooked in his belt, face set in the neutral expression he wore whenever trouble was brewing. Even young Billy Morrison, who'd been hauling water from the well, let his buckets clatter to the ground, sloshing precious water across the dirt. They all remembered the others. Catherine Whitmore had lasted 5 days. She'd arrived in spring, all lace and perfume and dreams of frontier romance, her trunk full of silk dresses meant for parlor entertaining. She'd taken one look at the isolation, the ranch house sitting alone in the valley, mountains rising like teeth on all sides, not another home for 7 miles in any direction, and something inside her had broken quietly. She'd stopped speaking on the 3rd day, started crying on the 4th. On the 5th morning, Elias had driven her back to town himself, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling even in the warm sunshine. Margaret O'Connor had been different. Irish, fiery, determined to make it work through sheer stubbornness. She'd lasted 6 days. Longer than Catherine, but the ending was worse. She'd screamed at Elias on that 6th evening. The whole town heard about it from the ranch hand who'd been in the barn. Called him a savage, a half-breed, a man who didn't deserve a Christian woman. She'd walked the 7 miles back to town in the dark, feet bleeding through her boots, and caught the next stage east without even collecting her belongings. Then came Louise Fletcher, sweet Louise, who everyone thought might actually make it. She'd been a widow, practical and mature, accustomed to hard work. She understood ranching, knew cattle, could cook for a crew of men without batting an eye. She lasted exactly 7 days. On the 8th morning, she was gone. She never told anyone what happened, but Martha Chen had seen her face when she'd taken a room at the boarding house, waiting for the stage. Louise had looked haunted, not frightened, haunted, like she'd seen something that confirmed her worst suspicions about the world. I pity the poor girl, Martha said now, watching the stage driver climb down from his perch. Whoever she is. Maybe she knows what she's getting into, Sheriff Garrett said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Maybe somebody finally told her the truth about Elias Crow. The truth. Martha's laugh was bitter. And what truth would that be, Tom? That his mother was Apache? That his father was a rancher who drank himself to death? That he lives like a ghost out there, hardly speaking, hardly coming to town except for supplies? I mean, the sheriff said carefully, that he's not like other men, and a woman has a right to know that before she steps off a stage and signs her life away. The coach door swung open. The woman who emerged was not what anyone expected. She wasn't young, perhaps 30, maybe older, with the kind of age that spoke of experience rather than freshness. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense that the other brides had been, with their carefully arranged curls and painted cheeks. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back in a simple knot, already coming loose from the journey. Her dress was practical gray wool, well made but not fancy, with dust from the trail already clinging to the hem. She carried no parasol, wore no gloves. But it was her face that made people stare. She looked directly at them, all of them. Her gaze swept across Main Street with the assessing quality of someone evaluating a property, not with the nervous excitement or dread of the previous brides. Her eyes, a sharp, clear gray, missed nothing. The shabby storefronts, the watching crowd, the judgment written on every face. "Ma'am!" the stage driver said, pulling down a single worn carpet bag and a wooden crate from the roof. "You're sure about this? Because I'm heading back through in 3 days and I can—" "I'm sure," she said. Her voice was level, with a trace of an accent that suggested Kansas or Missouri. "Thank you for your concern." She turned to survey the street again, and this time her eyes landed on Sheriff Garrett. She walked toward him with purposeful steps, her bag in one hand, leaving the crate for the driver to manage. "I'm looking for the Crow Ranch," she said. "I was told someone would meet me here." Up close, Garrett could see the intelligence in her face, the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and grief both. This was not a desperate woman fleeing scandal or poverty. This was not a foolish girl chasing romance. This was someone who'd made a calculated decision. It disturbed him more than any amount of desperation would have. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Tom Garrett, and I feel obliged to tell you that 3 women came before me and left?" She tilted her head slightly. "That Elias Crow is Half-Apache and lives in isolation? That the ranch is remote and the work is hard? Yes, I know all of that. I asked very specific questions before I came, Sheriff. I'm not here under false pretenses." Martha Chen had drifted closer, unable to help herself. "Child, you don't understand. Those women, they weren't weak. They weren't foolish. Something out there—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Something frightened them," the woman finished calmly. "Yes, people are often frightened of what they don't understand. I'm Hannah Brooks, formerly of Kansas City, and I'm here to marry Mr. Crow and help run his ranch. Now, is he coming to collect me, or should I arrange other transportation?" Before anyone could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Every head turned toward the north road, where a single rider appeared against the late afternoon sun. Elias Crow. Even at a distance, he was unmistakable. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, moving with the animal rather than merely riding it. As he drew closer, the details emerged. Tall, lean, with the kind of strength that came from work rather than leisure. His skin was the color of copper in summer, his hair black and long enough to touch his collar. He wore simple range clothes, worn denim, a dark shirt, a hat pulled low against the sun. But it was his face that always unsettled people. Not because it was frightening or cruel, but because it revealed nothing. His features were angular, handsome in a stark way, with his mother's high cheekbones and his father's strong jaw. But his eyes, dark and depthless as well water, gave away nothing of what he thought or felt. He rode directly to where Hannah stood and dismounted in one fluid motion. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and she looked back. The entire street held its breath. "Miss Brooks?" His voice was low, rough from disuse. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. A statement of fact. "Mr. Crow?" She extended her hand like a man would, firm and direct. "Thank you for coming to collect me." He looked at her outstretched hand for a moment. Several people swore later they saw surprise flicker across his face, then shook it once. His hand engulfed hers, calloused and strong. "Your trunk?" he asked. "Just the bag and that crate. I travel light." Something shifted in his expression, too subtle to name. "Name." He collected her belongings, secured them to his horse with efficient movements, then turned to her. "It's 7 miles. Can you ride?" "Yes." "Not side saddle. The terrain's too rough." "I prefer not to ride side saddle anyway. It's impractical." This time the reaction was clearer. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the equivalent of shocked amazement from a more expressive man. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was serious or simply trying to impress him. She gazed back, calm and unblinking. "I'll get a horse from the livery," he finally said, and started to turn. "Mr. Crow?" Hannah's voice stopped him. "Before we go, I'd like to make something clear. I read your letters carefully, all of them. You were honest about your circumstances, more honest than most men would be. I appreciated that. I'm here because I believe we can build something worthwhile together. I'm not expecting romance or ease. I'm expecting partnership and honest work. If that's acceptable to you, I'm ready to go to your ranch now. If it's not, I'll thank you for your time and take the next stage east." The street had gone absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Elias Crow looked at this strange, direct woman who spoke like she was negotiating a business contract rather than discussing marriage. Every other bride had smiled nervously, had tried to be charming, had looked at him with either pity or fear or some combination of both. Hannah Brooks looked at him like he was a man. Just a man. No more, no less. Partnership, he repeated slowly, testing the word. And honest work. Yes. No promises beyond that? None that I can't keep. He nodded once, decisive. I'll get the horse. 20 minutes later, they rode out of Redstone Valley together. Hannah sat her borrowed mount with competent ease, her gray skirts arranged for practicality rather than modesty, her attention on the trail ahead rather than on the town watching them go. Martha Chen stood on the boarding house porch until they disappeared from view. 7 days, she said softly. I give her 7 days. She's different from the others, Billy Morrison said hopefully. He'd developed a romantic streak since turning 16. They were all different, Sheriff Garrett said. Didn't matter in the end. The ride to the ranch passed in near silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Elias pointed out landmarks, the lightning-struck pine that marked the property line, the creek that ran year-round, the ridge where mountain lions sometimes denned. Hannah listened and asked occasional questions, practical ones about water sources and grazing ranges. She didn't ask about his mother's people, didn't ask about the previous brides, didn't ask any of the personal questions he'd learned to dread. As they climbed into the higher valley where his ranch sat, the land opened up before them. The house was small but well built, constructed of local timber and stone, with a wide porch facing east to catch the morning sun. The barn was larger, newer, with good strong bones. Beyond that lay corrals, a chicken coop, a root cellar dug into the hillside. It wasn't much, but it was honest, built with his own hands, maintained with care. Hannah reined in her horse and sat for a moment, surveying it all. Elias watched her face, waiting for the disappointment that always came. The realization of how isolated it was, how different from civilization, how utterly alone she would be out here. Good water access, she said finally. The barn placement is smart, protected from north winds. The house faces east for light but has the mountain behind it for shelter. You built this yourself. Most of it. Had help with the barn raising. It's well done. She dismounted, moving stiffly after the long ride. The previous women, they stayed in the house? Yes. Where did you sleep? The question was so direct it caught him off guard. The barn. Didn't seem right to... We weren't married yet. Practical. She walked toward the house, and he followed, leading both horses. I'll need to see the interior, understand the layout. Then we should discuss the work schedule, division of labor, expectations. You make it sound like a business arrangement. Hannah paused at the porch steps and turned to look at him. Her gray eyes were steady and somehow kind. Mr. Crow, we're strangers who've agreed to bind our lives together for practical reasons. You need help running this ranch. I need security and a place to build a life. That is a business arrangement. If something more develops over time, that's to the good. If it doesn't, we can still be effective partners. But I believe in clarity. It prevents misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Elias tied the horses to the porch rail, his mind working through her words. No woman had ever spoken to him like this before. So plainly, so without artifice or expectation. It was disorienting. Also, he was surprised to find a relief. The others, he said slowly, not looking at her, they came expecting something I couldn't give them. They wanted, I don't know, a different man, a different life. I'm not them. No. He met her eyes. You're not. The house interior was sparse but clean. One main room serving as kitchen and living area with a good stone fireplace. 2 small bedrooms off the back, a washroom added on. The furniture was handmade, sturdy rather than beautiful. No curtains, no decorations, nothing soft or welcoming about it. Hannah walked through each room, opening cupboards, checking the chimney drawer, testing the pump at the kitchen sink. She nodded to herself, making mental notes. You keep it clean, she observed. I was raised to respect my space. By your mother? There it was. The question. But the way she asked it was different, factual, not prying. He could choose to answer or not. Yes, he said. She believed cleanliness was a form of respect, for yourself and for the space that shelters you. A wise woman. Hannah moved to the kitchen area, examining the cook stove, the simple shelves. I'll need to know what supplies you keep on hand, what you usually eat, whether you have dietary restrictions or preferences. I eat what's available. Meat, beans, bread when I make it, coffee. Do you like vegetables? The question was so unexpected he almost laughed. Yes, I like vegetables. Good. I'll plant a kitchen garden come spring, but I'll need to know the growing season here, the frost dates, soil conditions. She turned to face him, and her expression was serious. Mr. Crow, I want to be very clear about something. I didn't come here to be taken care of or protected like some fragile thing. I came here to work. I'm strong, I'm capable, and I pull my weight. If you treat me like a guest or an ornament, I'll leave. Partnership means equals. Can you accept that? Elias stared at her. In the dim interior light, with dust motes drifting around her, this strange woman who'd ridden into his life, making demands and setting boundaries, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Miss Brooks, Hannah, if we're going to be married, you should use my name. Hannah. The name felt strange in his mouth, intimate. The others failed because I tried to protect them. I thought if I kept them away from the hard work, if I sheltered them from the difficult parts, they'd be happy. Instead, they felt useless, trapped. They didn't understand the land, didn't understand me, and I kept them too separate to learn. So you learned from your mistakes. She nodded approvingly. That's good. I'll make mistakes too. When I do, tell me directly. Don't let resentment build. Agreed? Agreed? Then let's discuss practicalities. She moved to the rough-hewn table and sat, gesturing for him to join her. How many head of cattle do you run? They talked for 2 hours as the light faded outside. Hannah asked questions, detailed, intelligent questions about the ranch operation, the market for beef, the challenges of the terrain, the seasonal work cycles. Elias found himself answering more fully than he'd intended, even sketching maps in the dust on the table to show her the property boundaries, the best grazing areas, the places where problems occurred. She didn't just listen. She thought. He could see her mind working, making connections, solving problems before they were fully articulated. The North Pasture, she said at one point. You said it floods in spring. Have you considered digging a drainage channel along the western edge? It would take work, but it might reclaim usable land. He paused. I hadn't thought of that. It's just an idea. I don't know the land like you do, but in Kansas, we had similar issues with low-lying fields. As full darkness fell, Elias lit lamps and Hannah unpacked her carpet bag. She'd brought almost nothing personal. Some clothes, a few books, a small wooden box she didn't open. The crate, she explained, contained seeds, basic medicines, some tools she'd thought might be useful. Practical supplies, she said. I didn't see the point in bringing things that wouldn't serve a purpose. Most women bring more, he said quietly. Most women aren't me. She set her belongings in the smaller bedroom with efficient movements, then returned to the main room. I should make supper. What do you usually eat in the evenings? Hannah. He stood, suddenly awkward. We should talk about arrangements. Sleeping. I'll stay in the barn like before, until we're properly married. There's a preacher comes through Redstone Valley twice a month. He'll be back in 5 days, Hannah finished. I asked in town. That brings us to Sunday. So we have 5 days to see if we can work together before making it legal. That seems reasonable. You're very... He searched for the word. Pragmatic. Would you prefer I be romantic? She tilted her head, curious rather than offended. I don't know what I prefer, he admitted. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to another person in years. This is all different. Different from the others, you mean? Yes. Hannah moved to the kitchen area and began examining the supplies. Mr. Crow? Elias. If we're using first names. Elias. She looked at him over her shoulder. I won't pretend to understand what happened with those other women, but I can tell you this. I make decisions carefully. I research. I consider. I don't act on impulse or emotion. Before I answered your advertisement, I spent weeks thinking about it. I wrote to references in your town. Yes, I was that thorough. I learned about the ranch, about you, about what to expect. So when I stepped off that stage today, I knew exactly what I was choosing. And what were you choosing? She turned fully to face him, her gray eyes reflecting lamplight. A hard life with purpose. An honest man who doesn't lie or manipulate. A place where I can build something lasting. Those things matter more to me than comfort or society or any of the other things women are supposed to want. Why? It was her turn to pause, considering. Because I spent 10 years in a comfortable house in Kansas City, married to a man who was everything society said I should want. He was charming, successful, respected. He was also a liar who gambled away everything we had and left me with nothing but debt when he died. I learned that comfort built on lies is worse than hardship built on truth. So when I saw your advertisement, so brutally honest about what you were offering, I knew I'd found something real. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Elias saw her differently now, this woman who'd walked into his life with such confidence. She wasn't running from nothing. She was running from something. And she'd chosen this remote ranch, this isolated life, this silent Half-Apache man, because at least it was honest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "About your husband." "Don't be. I'm not." She began pulling out pans, investigating the supplies. "Now, unless you object, I'm going to make supper. You must be hungry." "Hannah." "Yes?" "Thank you for being direct, for not—" He struggled for words, this man who'd spent so much of his life in silence. "For seeing me clearly." She smiled then, a small but genuine expression that transformed her serious face. "We'll see how well I actually see you, Elias. 5 days is just a start, but it's something." That night, Elias lay in the barn loft, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around him. But for the first time in months, years maybe, he didn't feel the crushing weight of loneliness. In the house 50 yards away, a lamp burned late. Hannah was reading or planning or doing whatever mysterious things this strange, practical woman did. She'd lasted 1 day. 1 day of honesty and clear eyes and direct questions. 1 day of treating him like a partner instead of a puzzle to solve or a danger to fear. 6 more days until the preacher came. 6 more days to see if this fragile possibility could become something real. For the first time since Catherine Whitmore had arrived in spring, Elias Crow allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could actually choose to stay. In the house, Hannah Brooks set down her book and looked around the sparse room that might become her home. She'd meant everything she told Elias. She had chosen this carefully, deliberately. But she hadn't told him the whole truth. She hadn't told him that she was terrified, not of him, not of the isolation, but of failing again. Of being not enough again. Her husband's death had freed her from a cage of lies, but it had also destroyed her faith in her own judgment. If she could be so wrong about the charming man she'd married, how could she trust her assessment of this silent rancher? But she'd watched Elias today, watched how he handled his horse, how he maintained his property, how he'd answered her questions with careful honesty, even when that honesty revealed his uncertainties. She'd seen a man who was genuinely trying, who'd learned from his mistakes, who wanted to do right even when he wasn't sure what right looked like. That was something. That was more than she'd had before. 7 days, the town had said. No woman lasted more than 7 days with Elias Crow. Hannah turned down the lamp and settled into the narrow bed. Tomorrow would be day 2, then 5 more after that. And if she made it through all 7, then maybe, just maybe, she could build something here that would last. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines. In the barn, Elias finally drifted into sleep. In the house, Hannah lay awake, planning gardens and work schedules and the careful architecture of a life she hoped to build. The first day had passed. Neither of them knew it yet, but they'd both already survived the hardest part. They'd told the truth. Everything else would be easier, or at least they'd face it honestly. In Redstone Valley, Martha Chen locked up her boarding house and said a quiet prayer for the latest bride. Sheriff Garrett made his evening rounds and wondered how long before he'd see Hannah Brooks again, walking back to town with bleeding feet and haunted eyes. But the ranch was dark and quiet, and the only sound was the wind and the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. Day 1 had passed without disaster, without tears, without flight. It was in its own small way a miracle. Tomorrow would bring day 2 and new tests and the slow, careful building of something that might, against all odds and expectations, become trust. The story of Elias and Hannah was just beginning, and unlike the stories that came before, this one might actually have a chance of lasting, if they could both be brave enough to keep telling the truth. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Hannah woke before first light, a habit ingrained from years of managing a household. She dressed quickly in the chilly bedroom, pulling on the same practical gray wool from yesterday and adding a heavy shawl against the morning cold. Her breath misted in the air as she made her way to the main room where the fireplace held nothing but dead ashes. She had the fire rebuilt and coffee brewing by the time Elias emerged from the barn, his hair damp from washing at the pump, his expression cautious. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident in the way he went still. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." Hannah poured coffee into 2 tin cups, strong and black. "I assume there's work to be done. We should eat and get started." He accepted the coffee, wrapping his hands around the cup's warmth. "Most people take a day or 2 to settle in, to rest after traveling. I'm not most people. We've established that." She cracked eggs into a pan with efficient movements. "Besides, I want to see the operation, understand what needs doing. Can't be a partner if I don't know the work." Elias watched her move around the kitchen with the ease of someone accustomed to providing for others. The other women had looked lost in this space, overwhelmed by its simplicity or dismayed by its lack of modern conveniences. Catherine had burst into tears when she realized there was no pump inside the house. Margaret had complained bitterly about the primitive conditions. Even Louise had sighed with resignation at what she'd have to work with. Hannah simply worked with what was there. "After breakfast," he said slowly, "I need to check the north fence line. There's been some damage from the early snow, and the cattle need moving to lower pasture before the real winter sets in. I'll come with you. It's a full day's ride, rough terrain. Then we should pack accordingly." She slid eggs onto 2 plates, added thick slices of bread she'd found in the cupboard. "I'll need proper work clothes if I'm going to be useful. What I have isn't suitable for ranch work." "There might be—" He hesitated. "My mother's things. In the trunk in the storage room. Some of it might fit you, if you don't mind." Hannah looked at him directly, understanding the weight of what he was offering. "I would be honored to wear your mother's clothes, thank you." They ate quickly, speaking little, but the silence was comfortable now, the silence of people focused on the work ahead rather than the awkwardness of strangers. When Hannah returned from the storage room, she'd transformed. The dress she wore was deerskin, softened with age and use, decorated with simple beadwork along the collar and cuffs. It fit her surprisingly well, and she moved in it with greater freedom than any dress she'd worn before. Elias stared for a moment too long. She looked nothing like his mother. Hannah was taller, her coloring different, her features sharper. But seeing someone else wearing those clothes, treating them with respect rather than curiosity or disgust, struck something deep in his chest. "She was smaller than me," Hannah said, smoothing the dress over her hips. "But the fit is good enough for work. These are beautifully made." "She was skilled with leather." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Learned from her grandmother. Taught me some before." "Before she died?" "Yes." Hannah nodded, asking nothing more, and went to prepare supplies for the day's ride. Elias saddled 2 horses while she packed food, water, basic tools. She worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who understood that preparation prevented problems. They rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The land was beautiful in the harsh way of high country, all stone and pine and endless sky. Hannah sat her horse with easy competence, her attention on the terrain, asking occasional questions about the property, the herd, the challenges of managing cattle in this elevation. "The winters here," Elias explained as they climbed a ridge, "they come hard and fast. Snow can pile 6 feet deep in a single storm. I lose cattle every year, the weak ones, the stupid ones. The land doesn't forgive mistakes." "How many head do you run?" 200, give or take. It's not a big operation, but it's what I can manage alone. Not alone anymore, Hannah said quietly. He glanced at her, this woman riding beside him in his mother's dress, her face set with determination against the cold wind. No, not alone anymore. If you stay, I'll stay. She said it with such simple certainty that he almost believed her. Unless you give me reason to leave, what would be reason enough? She considered this, guiding her horse around a rocky outcrop. Dishonesty, cruelty, treating me as less than an equal partner. Those things would make me leave. Hardship won't. Isolation won't. I'm not afraid of work or silence or difficulty. What are you afraid of? The question surprised them both. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of old pain. Being invisible. I spent 10 years married to a man who saw me as decoration, as proof of his success, but never as a person with my own thoughts and needs. I was invisible in my own life. I won't accept that again. Elias absorbed this, understanding more about her now. I see you, he said. I might not always know what to say or how to act, but I see you. She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd been unseen, misunderstood, finding unexpected clarity in each other. The fence line, when they reached it, was worse than Elias had feared. A section of nearly 50 yards had been knocked down, likely by elk moving through before the snow. Posts were snapped, wire tangled, and useless. It would take hours to repair, possibly days. Hannah dismounted and surveyed the damage with a practical eye. We'll need new posts. The wire can be salvaged mostly. Do you have supplies back at the ranch? Some. Not enough for all of this. Then we fix what we can today and make a list of what we need. She began gathering the tangled wire, her hands already working despite the cold. Show me how you want it done. They worked side by side through the morning and into the afternoon, Elias showing her how to set posts, how to string wire tight enough to hold, but with enough give to survive winter expansion and contraction. Hannah learned quickly, asking questions when she didn't understand, offering suggestions when she saw ways to improve efficiency. You've done ranch work before, Elias observed as she secured a post with expert twists of wire. Farm work, it's similar enough. My father had land in Missouri before he died. I grew up working it. She wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. It's part of why your advertisement appealed to me. I missed the work. City life felt useless. All those hours spent on appearance and social calls and meaningless conversation. At least here, what you do matters. It matters, he agreed, though sometimes I wonder if anyone else thinks so. The town doesn't trust you. It wasn't a question, and he appreciated her directness. No, they don't trust my blood. My mother's people and my father's people have been at war for generations. Being both makes me neither. Not white enough for the ranchers, not Apache enough for the tribes. Just between. Hannah straightened, studying him in the afternoon light. Being between can mean you understand both sides. That's not weakness. That's wisdom, if you use it right. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are fools. She returned to her work, matter of fact. Their opinions don't run this ranch. Ours do. They finished what they could by late afternoon, making a rough repair that would hold until they could do it properly. As they packed their tools, Elias found himself talking more than he had in months, telling Hannah about the land, the patterns of weather and wildlife, the delicate balance of managing a ranch and country this unforgiving. She listened and absorbed everything, occasionally making observations that showed she was thinking several steps ahead. When they mounted to ride back, he realized the day had passed in what felt like minutes. Working alongside her had been easy, natural. Tomorrow, she said as they rode, we should inventory supplies. Make a comprehensive list of what we need before winter truly sets in. And I want to understand the cattle operation better, how you manage breeding, culling, market timing. You're very focused on the practical aspects. Should I focus on something else? He smiled slightly, a rare expression. No, it's just refreshing. The others wanted to know about feelings, about the future, about things I couldn't answer. You want to know about fence posts and cattle breeding. Feelings and futures are built on fence posts and cattle breeding, Hannah said. Get the foundation right and the rest has a chance. Get it wrong, and all the romantic sentiment in the world won't save you. That night, Hannah cooked a proper supper while Elias tended the animals. When he returned to the house, he found the table set with care. Nothing fancy, but thoughtful. The food was simple but good, seasoned properly, portions generous. They ate together, discussing plans for the next day, falling into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. The town, Hannah said over coffee, expects me to fail, to run like the others. Yes. Does that bother you? Elias considered this. It bothers me that I've given them reason to expect it. 3 times now, I've tried to make this work and failed. At some point, the failure is mine, not theirs. You learned from each one, though. You told me that, and you've changed your approach with me. She set down her cup. So the question is, what specifically made them leave? Really? Not the isolation or the work. What was the actual breaking point? He'd never articulated it before, never really examined it closely. Catherine, he said slowly. She left because I kept her too separate from everything. She spent days alone in this house while I worked, and she felt like a prisoner. Margaret left because she wanted me to be someone I'm not. She thought she could change me, make me more civilized, more white. When I wouldn't pretend to be something else, she got angry. And Louise? He paused, remembering. Louise had been different. Louise had almost made it. Louise left because she was afraid, he finished. Not of me exactly, but of what being with me would mean. The town's judgment, the isolation from other white people, the reality of building a life with someone who would never fully belong anywhere. It was one thing to accept it in theory. Living it was different. Hannah absorbed this, her gray eyes thoughtful. So Catherine needed purpose. Margaret needed acceptance of who you are, and Louise needed courage to live outside society's approval. I suppose that's accurate. And you think I might lack one of those things too? I don't know what you lack, he admitted. You seem complete somehow, self-sufficient. It makes me wonder what you actually need from this arrangement. She stood and began clearing dishes, her movements deliberate. I need what I told you, security, purpose, honesty. But I also need, she paused at the wash basin, hands still. I need to know that my contributions matter, that I'm building something lasting, not just maintaining someone else's vision. I need partnership, Elias, real partnership. Not just help with chores, but actual say in how this place runs. You'll have that. Will I? Because that's frightening for most men. Sharing control, sharing decisions, admitting they don't have all the answers. He came to stand beside her, taking up a cloth to dry as she washed. I've been alone for 5 years, running this place myself, making every decision, carrying every burden. It's exhausting. The idea of sharing that weight, it's not frightening, it's relief. She glanced at him sidelong. You might feel differently when I make decisions you disagree with. Then we'll argue about it and find a solution that works for both of us. That's what partners do. A smile ghosted across her face. You have more faith in that process than I do. Arguments in my marriage meant days of cold silence and eventual capitulation on my part. I'm not your first husband. No, she said softly. You're not. They finished the dishes in companionable silence. Then Hannah excused herself to read while Elias checked the animals one final time before bed. When he returned, he found her at the table with a ledger she'd discovered in the storage room, making notes about supplies and costs with careful precision. You're doing my books? He asked, surprised. You said partnership. Books are part of running a ranch. I'm good with numbers. I managed my father's accounts before he died, and my husband's too before I realized he was hiding debts. She tapped the pencil against the page. Your record keeping is adequate, but could be more detailed. If we track expenses and income more carefully, we can identify patterns, make better decisions about when to buy and sell. Elias pulled up a chair beside her, looking at the neat columns she'd started creating. I've never been good at this part. Numbers on paper don't make sense to me the way land and cattle do. Then that's something I bring to the partnership. Everyone has strengths. She showed him what she'd started organizing, explaining her system with patient clarity. He found himself leaning closer, caught not just by the information, but by the way she thought, logical, thorough, always several steps ahead. "Hannah," he said when she paused, "why did you really come here? I don't mean the practical reasons. I mean, you could have found security other ways, stayed in Kansas City, remarried someone respectable. Why a stranger's ranch in the middle of nowhere?" She set down the pencil and turned to face him fully. In the lamplight, her features were softer, more vulnerable than during the day. "Because I was suffocating. In Kansas City, I was always someone's daughter, then someone's wife, then someone's widow. Never just myself. Every choice I made was judged against what was proper, what was expected, what people would think. And I realized after my husband died that I'd spent my entire life trying to fit into a shape that didn't suit me." She gestured around the sparse room. "Here. There's no one to judge except you and me. The land doesn't care if I wear practical clothes instead of fashionable ones. The cattle don't care if I speak my mind instead of staying demurely silent. I can be useful, genuinely useful, in ways that matter. That's worth more than any amount of comfort or respectability." "You're running away," he said, but not unkindly. "I'm running towards something. There's a difference." She met his eyes steadily. "Aren't you doing the same? You could have sold this place, moved somewhere people don't know your history, started fresh. But you stay here, working land that connects you to both parts of your heritage, refusing to pretend to be something simpler." He'd never thought of it that way. "I stay because this is mine. I built it. It matters." "Exactly. And I came because I wanted something that's mine too, that I build, that matters." The moment stretched between them, waited with understanding. They were both refugees in their own ways, seeking something authentic in a world that demanded they be false. "Day 2, Hannah said finally, breaking the spell. 5 more until the preacher comes. Still sure about this?" "Are you?" She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Ask me again after we finish the fence line, and the supply inventory, and the cattle move, and whatever other disasters the next few days bring." That's not a yes. It's not a no either. It's honest uncertainty, which is better than false promises. Elias laughed, an actual laugh, rusty from disuse but genuine. "You're a strange woman, Hannah Brooks. And you're a strange man, Elias Crow. We'll either be strange together or strange separately. Time will tell." He stood, preparing to head to the barn for the night. "Thank you, for today, for not pretending to be something you're not." "Thank you for the same." After he left, Hannah sat alone in the quiet house, listening to the wind outside and the settling sounds of the structure around her. Day 2 had passed. She'd worked hard, learned much, found unexpected ease in Elias's company. But she was also exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. Being honest was harder than she'd expected. Showing herself clearly, without the protective coloring of social niceties and expected behaviors, left her feeling exposed, vulnerable. Every conversation with Elias required her to dig deeper, to articulate things she'd barely admitted to herself. But it also felt right, clean, like washing away years of accumulated pretense and finding solid ground underneath. She thought about the 3 women who'd come before her, each failing in their own way. She understood them better now. Catherine, isolated and purposeless. Margaret, unable to accept Elias as he was. Louise, lacking the courage to live outside conventional approval. Hannah had purpose. The ranch work engaged her completely. She accepted Elias, found his mixed heritage interesting rather than problematic. But courage? That was still uncertain. Could she really sustain this isolated life, year after year, cut off from everything familiar? Could she weather the town's judgment, the inevitable hardships, the slow accumulation of difficult days? She didn't know. But she was willing to try, and for now that would have to be enough. In the barn, Elias lay awake, his mind churning through the day's events. Working with Hannah had felt natural in a way he hadn't anticipated. She didn't just accept his direction, she contributed, questioned, improved. When she'd suggested a better way to secure one of the fence posts, he'd listened and implemented her idea, and it had worked better than his original plan. No one had ever done that before. Improved on his methods, made him better at his own work. He thought about her question. What was he afraid of? He hadn't answered honestly. The truth was, he was afraid of hope. Hope had failed him 3 times already, and each failure had carved something out of him, left him more hollow. With Catherine, he'd hoped for companionship. With Margaret, he'd hoped for acceptance. With Louise, he'd hoped for understanding. Hannah offered none of those things explicitly. She offered only partnership, work, honesty. Somehow, that felt more sustainable. Lower risk. If you didn't hope for everything, maybe you wouldn't be destroyed when it didn't materialize. But despite his attempts at caution, he felt hope anyway. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. That maybe Hannah's directness and strength and peculiar way of seeing the world clearly would be enough. 5 more days. Then the decision would be real, legal, binding. He wondered if either of them would have the courage to follow through. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with the promise of snow. Hannah was again up before Elias, and again had coffee ready when he came in from morning chores. They fell into an easy routine: breakfast, planning the day's work, dividing tasks. "I want to see the cattle today," Hannah said. "Understand the herd composition, identify problems, see how they're managing with the cold." "It's going to snow," Elias warned. "Might be better to wait. Or it might be worse tomorrow. Best to see them before the weather turns fully." He couldn't argue with that logic. They rode out together, and Hannah proved her competence once more. She evaluated the cattle with a practiced eye, noting which animals looked strong and which showed signs of struggle, asking detailed questions about breeding decisions, winter feeding strategies, market timing. "That cow there," she pointed to a rangy red animal. "She's older but still producing good calves. But see how her hips are? She'll have trouble with another pregnancy. Better to cull her this season while she still has value." Elias looked at the cow with new eyes. Hannah was right. He'd kept the animal out of sentiment, knowing she was one of his best producers, but sentiment didn't feed cattle through winter. "I'll mark her for sale." They worked through the herd systematically, Hannah making notes, Elias providing history on individual animals. The snow started around midday, light at first but building steadily. By the time they turned for home, it was falling thick and fast, visibility dropping. "This is going to be bad," Elias said, reading the storm in ways Hannah was still learning. "We need to get back." They pushed the horses hard, racing the weather. By the time they reached the ranch, snow was already accumulating, the wind driving it sideways. They worked together to secure the animals, bringing the horses into the barn, checking that the cattle had shelter, closing up the chicken coop. "Inside," Elias ordered when the worst was done. "We'll be snowed in for a while. Need to make sure we have everything we need." In the house, Hannah built up the fire while Elias checked supplies. The storm intensified through the afternoon, wind howling around the house, snow piling against the windows. They couldn't see 10 feet beyond the porch. 3 days, Elias said, watching the storm. "Maybe 4. This won't blow through quickly. So we're trapped together." Hannah said it lightly, but there was tension underneath. Being alone together in the house was different from working side by side outdoors. More intimate, more uncertain. "I can stay in the barn if you'd prefer." "Don't be ridiculous. You'll freeze. We're adults. We can share a house without impropriety." But as evening fell and the storm showed no signs of weakening, the small house seemed to shrink around them. Hannah cooked supper while Elias mended tack by lamplight, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Conversation came in fits and starts, comfortable moments broken by awkward silences. After supper, Hannah brought out a deck of cards. "Do you play?" "Some. My mother taught me." They played simple games at first, then Hannah taught him more complex ones, her competitive streak showing through. Elias found himself relaxing, even laughing when she won a particularly close hand through clever strategy. "You're ruthless," he observed. "Only at cards. In life, I try to be fair." "But you play to win." "Always. What's the point of playing otherwise?" The storm raged on outside, but inside the small house, warmth built from more than just the fire. They talked about childhood, Hannah's memories of her father's farm, Elias's recollections of learning to track and hunt from his mother. They discovered shared experiences. Both had lost parents young, both had spent time being outsiders, both valued competence over charm. "Your mother," Hannah said carefully, "you loved her very much. She was everything. After my father drank himself to death, it was just her and me. She taught me everything that matters: how to read the land, how to survive, how to maintain dignity even when people treat you as less than human. She sounds remarkable. She was. She died when I was 17. Fever took her in 3 days. I've been alone since then. Hannah reached across the table and briefly squeezed his hand, a gesture of comfort, nothing more. But Elias felt it like a brand. You're not alone now. For 3 more days at least, he said, trying to lighten the moment. For longer than that, if I have anything to say about it. The evening stretched on, the storm a constant presence, but somehow distant from the circle of warmth they'd created. When Hannah finally retired to her room, Elias sat by the dying fire, marveling at how quickly things had shifted. 3 days ago, he'd been alone. Now he was simply lonely when Hannah left the room. It was terrifying. It was also the best he'd felt in years. Day 3 had passed, 4 more until the preacher came, and somewhere in the storm and the firelight and the simple act of sharing space, something was growing between them. Not romance, not yet, but possibility. Genuine, fragile possibility. In her room, Hannah lay awake listening to the storm and the sounds of Elias moving through the house, banking the fire, checking the door locks. She'd played cards with him tonight and seen glimpses of who he'd been before loneliness and rejection had taught him to hide himself. There was humor there, intelligence, even playfulness when he felt safe enough to show it. She was beginning to like him. More than like him. She was beginning to trust him. That was the most dangerous thing of all. The storm that had begun on day 3 showed no mercy. By morning, snow had drifted halfway up the windows, transforming the world beyond the house into an endless expanse of white. Hannah woke to the sound of wind screaming around the eaves and Elias already moving in the main room, stoking the fire back to life. She emerged wrapped in a blanket, her breath misting in the cold air that had crept in overnight despite their best efforts. Elias glanced up from the fireplace, his face shadowed with concern she was learning to read in the smallest shifts of expression. "It's worse than I thought," he said without preamble. "The temperature dropped hard during the night. The cattle will be struggling." Hannah moved to the window, peering through the small clear space at the top where snow hadn't yet covered the glass. The barn was barely visible through the driving snow, a dark shape in a white chaos. "Can we reach them?" "I can. You should stay here where it's safe." She turned to face him, and her expression stopped whatever else he might have said. "We've been through this, Elias. Partnership means I don't hide in the house while you risk yourself. If the cattle need help, we both go." "Hannah, this isn't ordinary weather. People die in storms like this. Get turned around, lose their way, freeze 10 feet from shelter. Then we'll be careful. We'll rope ourselves together if we have to. But I won't sit here useless while you're out there alone." She moved to pull on the warmest clothes she had, layering everything she could find. "You said yourself, partnership means sharing the burdens, the good and the bad." Elias watched her prepare with a mixture of frustration and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like admiration. The other women would have been relieved to stay inside, grateful even. Hannah looked at the same deadly storm and saw only work that needed doing. "You're stubborn," he said. "So are you. We'll match well." She wrapped a scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. "Now show me what we need to do." They roped themselves together with 50 feet of strong line, Elias leading, Hannah following close behind. The moment they stepped off the porch, the wind hit like a physical blow, driving snow into every gap in their clothing, stealing breath from their lungs. Elias had walked this path to the barn 1,000 times, could do it blind, but the storm disoriented even him. Twice he had to stop and reorient using the rope line he'd strung between house and barn years ago for exactly this purpose. The barn, when they finally reached it, was marginally warmer than outside but far from comfortable. The horses stamped nervously in their stalls, the milk cow lowed her distress. Elias and Hannah worked together without needing to discuss it. She fed and watered the animals while he checked the structure, looking for places where wind might be getting through, where snow might be accumulating dangerously on the roof. "The cattle!" he shouted over the wind howling through cracks. "I need to check on them. They should be in the near pasture, sheltered by the ridge, but if they've scattered, then we find them," Hannah finished, She was shaking from cold already, but her voice remained steady. Which direction? Hannah, no, this is too dangerous. I can move faster alone. And if you fall? If you get hurt? Then we both die because I don't know where you've gone. She gripped his arm, her gray eyes fierce above the scarf. Stop trying to protect me and let me help you. We're wasting time arguing. He wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at him to send her back to the house, to keep her safe the way he'd failed to keep the others happy. But she was right. They were wasting time, and the cattle couldn't wait. More than that, the set of her shoulders, the determination in her eyes, told him she wouldn't obey even if he ordered it. Stay close, he finally said. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. No questions. Agreed? Agreed. They ventured out into the full fury of the storm, leaving the relative shelter of the barn. Elias knew these pastures like he knew his own hands, but the snow had transformed everything into alien landscape. Familiar landmarks disappeared. Distances became impossible to judge. He navigated by feel and instinct, stopping frequently to check their position, to make sure Hannah was still close behind. They found the first dead cow within 20 minutes. A young heifer who'd gotten separated from the herd, tried to shelter behind a boulder, and simply frozen. Hannah stared at the snow-covered carcass for a long moment, and Elias waited for her reaction. Tears, maybe, or revulsion, or the kind of sentimental grief that city people felt about livestock. Instead, she bent down and checked the brand, then looked up at him. Number 47, she's in your records. I'll mark her as lost when we get back. The practicality of it, the immediate acceptance and move forward, struck him harder than any amount of crying would have. She understood, not just intellectually, but bone deep, that this was the reality of ranching in hard country. Animals died. You mourned the loss of value and moved on. They found the main herd huddled in the lee of the ridge, as Elias had hoped, but conditions were bad and getting worse. Snow had piled in drifts that trapped several animals. Others stood with their heads down, frost forming on their muzzles, their body heat melting snow that then refroze into dangerous ice. We need to move them, Elias shouted over the wind. Get them closer to the barn, into the near paddock where we can manage them better. It was brutal work. The cattle, already stressed and cold, didn't want to move. Elias and Hannah worked from opposite sides, using voice and presence to push the herd in the right direction. Hannah proved herself again, reading the animal's behavior, knowing when to push and when to hold back, never panicking when a steer broke from the group or a cow turned aggressive from fear. They worked for hours, or what felt like hours. Time lost meaning in the storm. The world narrowed to the next animal, the next few feet of progress, the constant battle against wind and cold, and the cattle's stubborn resistance. Hannah fell twice, going down hard in deep drifts, but each time she struggled back up without complaint, without asking for help, simply continuing the work. By the time they got the herd secured in the near paddock, both of them were beyond exhausted. Elias's face was raw from windburn, his hands numb despite heavy gloves. Hannah moved with the stiff carefulness of someone whose body had gone past its limits and now ran on will alone. Inside, Elias ordered, his voice hoarse from shouting over the wind. We've done what we can. Getting back to the house was its own nightmare. The wind had shifted, making the familiar path treacherous. Elias had to stop multiple times to regain his bearings, and once, just once, he felt real fear cut through the exhaustion. If he got them lost, if he led them away from the house instead of toward it, they could die within sight of shelter. But Hannah's hand found his in the white chaos, squeezed once. Whether giving reassurance or seeking it, he couldn't tell. And somehow that helped him focus. He found the guide rope, followed it hand over hand, and finally felt the blessed solidity of the porch steps beneath his feet. They stumbled inside, and Elias slammed the door against the wind, shutting out the storm's fury. For a moment, they simply stood in the main room, dripping, melting snow, too exhausted even to remove their outer layers. Then Hannah started to laugh. It was a wild, slightly hysterical sound, but there was genuine mirth in it too. "We did it," she gasped out between laughs. "We actually did it." Elias stared at her, this woman who'd just spent hours in a deadly storm doing brutal work, who was now laughing like they'd accomplished something wonderful instead of merely surviving. And then, despite everything, he found himself laughing too. "You're insane," he said, but there was no heat in it. "Completely insane." "So are you. Who checks on cattle in weather like this?" But she was grinning behind the scarf, her eyes bright with something that might have been joy, or might have been shock, or might have been both. They helped each other out of the frozen outer layers, hanging everything near the fire to dry. Elias's hands shook as he tried to work the buttons on his coat, fingers too numb to cooperate. Without a word, Hannah stepped close and did it for him, her own hand steadier despite the cold. The intimacy of the gesture, her fingers working the buttons of his coat, standing so close he could see ice crystals melting in her hair, should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it felt natural, necessary. "You too," he said when his coat was off, and returned the favor, helping her out of the heavy layers until they both stood in somewhat drier clothes, still shivering but beginning to thaw. Hannah moved to the kitchen and put coffee on with hands that barely cooperated. Elias rebuilt the fire into a roaring blaze, feeding it until heat finally began to push back the cold that had settled into their bones. They sat close to the flames, wrapped in blankets, holding cups of coffee that they were too tired to drink. "That was day 4, Hannah said after a long silence. Her voice was thoughtful, distant. "3 more until the preacher comes. Are you counting down to your escape?" She turned to look at him, and in the firelight, her face was open in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm counting forward to a decision. And after today, I think I know what mine will be." Elias's heart did something complicated in his chest. "You could have died out there. Several times. I almost got us lost coming back. But you didn't. We didn't." She set down her coffee and pulled the blanket tighter. "Do you know what I realized today? Out there in the storm, doing the work, trusting you to lead us home?" "What?" "That this is real. Not some romantic idea of frontier life, not an escape from my past, but actual reality. Hard and dangerous and demanding everything I have. And I want it. I want this life, this work, this—" She gestured around the small house. "This honesty, even when it's brutal. Most people would call that foolish. Most people spend their lives being comfortable and wondering why they feel empty." She met his eyes directly. "I'd rather be challenged and alive. And today I felt more alive than I have in years. Terrified, yes. Exhausted, absolutely. But alive." Elias wanted to say something meaningful, something that matched the weight of her confession, but words failed him. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, still cold, roughened from work, the hand of a partner rather than a lady, and held it. "I'm glad you stayed," he said simply. "Glad you came out there with me. I couldn't have moved the herd alone." "Partnership," Hannah said softly. "Sharing the burdens. That's what you promised." "That's what I promised." They sat that way for a long time, hands linked, watching the fire burn. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, something had shifted. Some barrier had come down. They'd faced death together and survived, worked past their limits together and succeeded. Words like mail-order bride and stranger seemed laughably inadequate for what they'd become to each other. Eventually, Hannah stirred. "I should make food. We need to eat, keep our strength up." "I'll help." They moved around the kitchen together, their earlier ease now deepened by shared experience. Hannah's movements were still stiff from the cold and exertion, and once she stumbled, catching herself on the counter. Elias was there instantly, steadying her, and she leaned into his strength without hesitation or self-consciousness. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For trusting me today. For letting me be useful instead of protected. For treating me like I'm capable even when it's dangerous." "Hannah, you proved you're capable. I just followed your lead on that." She smiled, tired but genuine. "We proved we work well together. That's more important than individual capability." They ate in companionable silence, both too exhausted for much conversation. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying, the wind finding new ways to howl through cracks they'd never noticed before. After supper, Elias went around the house checking every possible opening, stuffing rags into gaps, doing everything he could to keep the deadly cold at bay. Hannah watched him work, recognizing the care he took with his home, the way he moved through space with unconscious grace. This man who the town called savage, who 3 women had fled from, who lived isolated by choice and circumstance, he was perhaps the most civilized person she'd ever met. Civilized in the true sense. He understood how to live well in the world he inhabited, respected the balance of nature and necessity, maintained dignity without arrogance. "Elias," she said as he finished his inspection, "why did you advertise for a wife? Really? You seem content with solitude. You have help when you need it for big jobs. Why take the risk of bringing someone else into your life after it failed 3 times?" He lowered himself into the chair across from her, considering the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Because being content with solitude isn't the same as choosing it. I built this ranch to be something more than just a place for one person to survive. I wanted—" He paused, searching for words. "I wanted to build a life, not just maintain an existence. And you can't build a life alone. Not a full one. Not one that matters beyond your own survival. So it's about legacy? Children?" "Partly, maybe, but more than that. It's about the difference between marking time and actually living. When you're alone, you can convince yourself that what you're doing is enough. But then seasons pass and nothing changes, nothing grows, and you realize you're just waiting to die." The stark honesty of it made Hannah's throat tight. "That's a bleak way to live. It was killing me slowly, so I took the risk. 3 times now. And 3 times I've failed, but at least I tried. At least I reached for something more." "You didn't fail," Hannah said firmly. "They did. They came here with expectations you couldn't meet, wanting you to be something you're not. That's their failure, not yours." "Generous interpretation. Honest interpretation. You were clear about what you offered. They agreed and then changed their minds. That's not the same as you failing." Elias studied her face in the lamplight, this woman who kept surprising him with her fierce defense of him, her refusal to accept the narratives others had written. "Why are you different, Hannah? Why can you see things they couldn't?" She considered this, wanting to give him truth. "Because I'm not looking for a fairy tale. I already had what I thought was a perfect life, a perfect marriage, and it was built on lies and illusions. When that shattered, I had to rebuild my understanding of what matters. And what matters isn't perfection or ease or meeting society's expectations. What matters is truth, reliability, building something real even when it's hard." "You found all that in an advertisement from a Half-Apache rancher?" "I found the possibility of it. You wrote an honest letter about a difficult life. Most men would have lied, made it sound better than it is. You didn't. That honesty was worth more than any amount of polish or charm." "I'm not charming," he said, a hint of humor in his voice. "No, you're not. But you're real. And after years of charm that mask cruelty and lies, real is infinitely more valuable." The storm battered the house through the night, testing every nail and board. Elias and Hannah took turns keeping the fire high, neither trusting the night's brutal cold. During Hannah's watch, around 3 in the morning, she heard something crack outside, sharp and loud even over the wind. She moved to the window and saw in the pre-dawn darkness that a tree branch had broken, falling dangerously close to the barn. She woke Elias immediately. "The barn! There's damage!" He was up instantly, pulling on his coat before he was fully awake. Hannah was already dressed, ready to go with him. This time, he didn't argue. They went out together into the screaming darkness, fought their way to the barn, and found that the fallen branch had indeed damaged part of the roof. Snow was already beginning to accumulate inside, and the animals were panicked. Working by lantern light in the freezing dark, they shored up the damage as best they could, moving the animals to the undamaged section, creating a temporary barrier against the worst of the weather. It took 2 hours of brutal work, every movement a battle against cold that wanted to steal the life from their limbs. Back in the house, finally, as gray dawn light began to penetrate the storm, they collapsed near the fire. Hannah's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hold her coffee cup. Elias took it from her and set it aside, then pulled her hands between his own, warming them with his body heat and breath. "This is day 5, she said through chattering teeth. "The others were gone by now. Do you want to be?" She met his eyes, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with words. No, I want to finish what we started. The fence line, the supply inventory, the barn roof that now needs proper repair. All of it. All of it, he repeated, understanding she meant more than just ranch work. I'm staying, Elias. When the preacher comes in 2 days, I'm going to marry you. Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I'm desperate, but because in 5 days of brutal honesty and brutal work, I found more purpose and partnership than I had in 10 years of comfortable marriage. He should have been relieved, grateful. Instead, he felt fear curl in his gut. You don't know that yet. You're exhausted. You've been through trauma. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have. She turned her hands in his so she was gripping him back, holding on. I know myself, Elias. I know what I can sustain and what I can't. And I can sustain this. I want to sustain this. But what if you're wrong? What if in a month, a year, you realize you've made a terrible mistake? You'll be trapped here, legally bound. Then we'll deal with it together, like partners do. She pulled one hand free and touched his face, the gesture tender despite her roughened fingers. You're so afraid of hope. I understand why. But hope is just planning for the possibility of good things. And I think good things are possible here, with us, if we're brave enough. Elias closed his eyes, leaning into her touch despite himself. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that this time would be different, that Hannah's strength and clarity and refusal to flinch would be enough to overcome all the obstacles that had defeated the others. What if I'm not brave enough? He asked, the question barely a whisper. Then I'll be brave for both of us until you are. She opened her arms, and he went into them, letting her hold him while the storm raged outside and 5 days of careful distance finally collapsed into honest need. They stayed that way for a long time, drawing warmth and strength from each other, no longer two separate people enduring hardship, but something new, something that was beginning to feel like home. When they finally pulled apart, the light outside had grown stronger despite the continued storm. Day 5 was fully upon them, and there was work to be done, animals to tend, damage to assess, supplies to manage. But something fundamental had changed. They moved through the work now as a unit, anticipating each other's needs, dividing labor without discussion, functioning with the easy coordination of people who'd worked together for years rather than days. The storm finally began to break late that afternoon, the wind dying, the snow tapering to light flurries. Elias ventured outside and stood on the porch, surveying the transformed landscape. Drifts piled against buildings, the path to the barn completely obliterated, everything softened and made strange by the deep snow. Hannah joined him, and they stood shoulder to shoulder looking at the work ahead, digging out, repairing damage, checking on cattle, clearing paths. It was overwhelming. It was also beautiful in its way, this harsh land demanding everything from them. 2 more days, Hannah said quietly. Then we make it official. Are you sure? You can still change your mind. I would understand. She turned to face him, cutting off his words. Stop giving me exits, Elias. Stop protecting me from my own choices. I'm a grown woman who knows her own mind. I'm staying. I'm marrying you. And we're building something here that will last. So you can accept that and move forward, or you can keep questioning it and insult us both. He stared at her, this fierce woman who'd survived everything the land could throw at them and come out stronger, who'd made her choice and refused to be talked out of it. And for the first time, he let himself fully believe. Partnership, he said. Partnership, she agreed. And honest work. Always. He took her hand, lacing their cold fingers together. Then let's get married on Sunday, build this life we're planning, and see where it takes us. Hannah smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Now you're understanding. Took you long enough. They went back inside as darkness fell on day 5, and Elias realized something profound had happened. He'd stopped thinking of Hannah as a stranger, a temporary presence, a risk that might fail. She'd become permanent in his mind, essential, as much a part of the ranch as the house or the land itself. That night, after supper and quiet conversation, after final checks on the animals and the slow business of settling in for sleep, Elias didn't go to the barn. Instead, he laid out bedding near the fire in the main room, creating a proper sleeping space that was still respectful of propriety. Hannah, watching from her bedroom doorway, felt her heart do something complicated. He was trying to bridge the gap between their separate lives and the shared future they were planning, trying to show her she mattered without overstepping boundaries she'd set. "Good night, Elias," she said softly. "Good night, Hannah." She closed her door but didn't sleep for a long time, listening to the sounds of him settling in, the crackle of the fire, the wind finally dying outside. 5 days had passed. The 5 days that had broken 3 other women, that everyone in town expected to break her too. Instead, they'd forged her and Elias into something stronger than either had been alone. The storm had tested them, and they'd passed, not because it had been easy, but because they'd faced it together, honestly, with all their strength and stubbornness and refusal to quit. 2 more days until the preacher came. 2 more days of this strange courtship built on work and weather and words that cut straight to truth. Then a wedding, a legal bond, a commitment that would transform possibility into permanence. Hannah found she was no longer afraid. Uncertain about details, yes. Unclear about exactly how everything would unfold, absolutely. But the deep terror that had plagued her earlier, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she was repeating old patterns, that she'd end up invisible and diminished again, that was gone. She'd been seen, truly seen, by a man who valued her strength more than her softness, her competence more than her charm, her honesty more than her compliance. That was worth building on, worth betting her future on. In the main room, Elias lay awake by the dying fire, his own thoughts equally restless. 7 days, the town had said. No woman lasted 7 days with Elias Crow, but Hannah had made it through 5 of the hardest days imaginable, days that would have broken most people regardless of gender. 2 days remained. Then she'd either marry him or she wouldn't. Either way, she'd already changed him, shown him what partnership could actually mean, given him hope again when he'd thought he'd used it all up. The house settled around them, warm despite the cold outside, secure despite the storm's battering. 2 people, soon to be 1 family, building something real in hard country. It wasn't the story anyone in Redstone Valley expected. But then, nothing about Hannah Brooks had been what anyone expected. And that, Elias thought as he finally drifted toward sleep, was exactly why it might actually work. Morning broke clear and blindingly bright, the storm finally spent. Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through her window, reflecting off endless white in a way that hurt her eyes. She could hear Elias already moving in the main room, the smell of coffee drifting through the house. Day 6 had arrived. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him standing at the window, coffee cup in hand, surveying the damage with the assessing gaze she'd come to recognize. He turned when he heard her, and something in his expression had shifted overnight. There was less guardedness there, less waiting for her to change her mind. "We need to dig out," he said simply. "Check on the herd, assess losses, start repairs. It'll take days to get back to normal." "Then we'd better start now." Hannah poured her own coffee and stood beside him at the window. The world outside looked simultaneously beautiful and treacherous, all those soft curves of snow hiding hazards beneath. "How bad do you think it is?" "Bad. We'll have lost more cattle. The barn roof needs proper fixing before the next storm. The fences will be down in places we can't even see yet." He paused. "It's going to be hard work." "Good thing there are 2 of us then." He glanced at her, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good thing." They spent the morning digging paths through snow that in places came up to Hannah's waist. The work was exhausting, each shovelful heavy with the wet snow that had fallen in the storm's final hours. But there was something satisfying about it too, about carving order out of chaos, creating passage where before there'd been only impassable white. The cattle had fared better than Elias had feared, but worse than he'd hoped. They found 3 more dead, including one of his best breeding cows. Hannah helped him mark their positions so they could deal with the carcasses properly once the ground thawed. Her face set with the same practical acceptance she'd shown before. This was ranching. This was the price of living in hard country. Sentiment didn't change facts. By midday, they'd checked the essential structures and begun a list of repairs that would take weeks to complete. The barn roof was first priority, but the chicken coop had sustained damage too, and several fence sections had collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. The scope of work was daunting even looking at it together. "We'll need supplies from town," Hannah said, reviewing the list she'd made. Lumber, nails, more wire. And we should check if anyone else needs help. Storms like this hit everyone. Elias looked at her in surprise. You want to help the neighbors? Of course. That's what people do, isn't it? Help each other when times are hard? The town doesn't exactly welcome me with open arms. Then we'll change that. Hannah's voice was firm. We're building a life here, Elias, a real life, not an isolated existence. That means being part of the community, whether they like it or not. Besides, good neighbors are good business. If we help when they need it, they'll help when we need it. You make it sound simple. The principle is simple. The execution might be harder. She met his eyes. But we're going to be married tomorrow. That makes this official, makes me part of this place. I intend to claim my place properly. There was steel in her voice, the same determination he'd seen when she'd refused to stay behind during the storm. Hannah Brooks didn't do anything halfway. He was learning. When she committed fully. Then we'll go to town tomorrow morning, he said. Early, get the supplies we need, see who else needs help, and be back in time for the preacher. And let everyone see that I'm still here, that I stayed. Hannah smiled slightly. Let them gossip about that. They worked through the afternoon on the barn roof, Elias showing Hannah how to assess the damage and plan the repair. She proved quick to learn, as always, asking intelligent questions, suggesting solutions he hadn't considered. At one point, balanced on the roof beam while he handed up materials, she looked down at the ranch spread below them, the house, the corrals, the pastures stretching toward distant mountains, and felt something settle in her chest. This was hers now, or would be tomorrow. This land, this work, this hard, beautiful life. She'd chosen it with clear eyes and firm purpose, and she felt no regret, only anticipation for everything that lay ahead. What are you thinking? Elias called up, seeing her pause. That it's beautiful, brutal and demanding, but beautiful. She looked down at him, backlit by afternoon sun, and that I'm glad I'm here to see it. Something in his face softened. I'm glad you're here too. They finished the immediate repair work as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Back in the house, they fell into the evening routine that had become familiar over 6 days, Hannah cooking while Elias tended animals, both moving with the easy coordination of much longer partnership. Over supper, they'd discuss the next day's trip to town, the supplies they'd need, how to approach the community. Hannah had ideas about that, ways to make it clear she was staying without being aggressive about it, ways to claim her place that wouldn't put Elias in a defensive position. You've thought about this a lot, he observed. I've thought about everything a lot. That's how I am. She pushed food around her plate. My first husband hated that about me, said I overthought things, couldn't just feel and act. But thinking things through is how I understand the world. I don't hate it. Elias set down his fork. It's one of the things I value most about you. You don't act on impulse and then regret it later. You consider, you plan, you commit with full knowledge of what you're choosing. Is that your way of saying you trust my judgment? It's my way of saying I trust you, period. The weight of that simple statement hung in the air between them. Trust was the foundation everything else would be built on, and they both knew it. Hannah reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture becoming familiar now, comfortable. I trust you too, she said quietly. I know that's not easy for either of us, but I do. That evening, they sat together going over the ranch books, Hannah showing Elias the system she'd developed for tracking expenses and income. He followed along, occasionally asking questions, more often just watching her work with something like wonder. She made complex things simple, found patterns he'd never noticed, already had ideas for improving efficiency next season. You're going to transform this place, he said at one point. We're going to transform it, she corrected. Together. I might have ideas, but you know the land, the cattle, what works and what doesn't. My ideas are only valuable if they're grounded in your experience. Partnership. Always partnership. As the evening wore on, Elias found himself talking more freely than he could remember doing in years. Maybe ever. He told Hannah about his childhood, about growing up between two worlds and being fully accepted by neither, about his mother's quiet strength and his father's steady decline into alcoholism, about the years after they'd both died, when he'd built the ranch alone, driven by some desperate need to prove he could create something lasting. Hannah listened without judgment, asking occasional questions, offering observations that showed she understood the loneliness of his position, the constant proving himself to people who'd already decided what he was worth. "That changes tomorrow," she said when he fell silent. "When we marry, you're no longer alone. And that changes the dynamic with the town, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. A married man with a wife who chooses to be there, that's different from a lone rancher they can dismiss. You think marrying me will make them accept me? I think it's a first step. Acceptance takes time, takes consistent positive interactions. But we have time, and I'm very good at positive interactions when I choose to be." Elias smiled at that, imagining Hannah's combination of iron will and practical charm deployed on the skeptical citizens of Redstone Valley. They won't know what hit them. Exactly. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as night deepened, books they'd read, places they'd been, small preferences and peculiarities that would matter in daily life together. Hannah didn't like eggs cooked soft. Elias couldn't stand the smell of lavender. She was an early riser by nature. He did his best thinking late at night. Small things, trivial things, but the building blocks of a shared life. "Tomorrow," Hannah said eventually, the word heavy with meaning, "we should talk about expectations for the marriage itself." Elias tensed slightly, understanding what she was asking. "What do you want to know?" "What you expect from me as a wife. Beyond the work, the partnership. There are other aspects to marriage." She was being delicate about it, but the question was clear. He appreciated her directness while recognizing this was harder for her to be direct about than ranch work or finances. "Hannah, I'm not going to force anything on you. We'll figure things out as we go, at whatever pace feels right for both of us." He met her eyes steadily. "The other women? I never even touched them beyond shaking hands. They left before we got anywhere near that kind of intimacy. So I have no expectations except that we treat each other with respect and honesty." Relief flickered across her face. "My first marriage was difficult in that regard. He saw it as his right, never something that required my participation or enjoyment. I'd prefer our marriage to be different. It will be. I promise you that." He reached for her hand again. "When we're ready, if we're ready, it'll be something we both choose, together, like everything else." She nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you. For understanding, for not making assumptions. Thank you for trusting me enough to talk about it." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire burning low, the house settling around them. Outside, the clear night brought brutal cold, but inside they'd created warmth that went beyond the physical. They'd created safety, understanding, the beginning of something that felt increasingly like home. "I should sleep," Hannah said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Tomorrow's going to be our wedding day." She smiled, stood, then impulsively bent and kissed his forehead, a gesture of affection and promise. "Good night, Elias. Sleep well." He caught her hand before she could pull away completely. "Hannah? I'm glad you stayed. Glad you chose this. Glad it's you. I'm glad it's you too." Morning came cold and diamond bright, the seventh day dawning with crystalline clarity. Hannah woke with her heart pounding, the reality of what she was about to do suddenly overwhelming. In a few hours, she'd be married, legally bound to a man she'd known less than a week. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was also absolutely right. She dressed with care, choosing the best dress she owned, still practical gray wool, but well-fitted and clean. She braided her hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the small mirror and barely recognizing the woman looking back. 6 days of hard work had already changed her face, giving it color and life it hadn't had in years. 6 days of honest conversation had changed something deeper, giving her back a sense of purpose she'd thought lost forever. Elias was waiting in the main room, also dressed in his best, clean denim trousers, a white shirt that made his copper skin seem to glow, his long black hair neatly tied back. He looked up when she emerged, and something shifted in his expression, softening it. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up well yourself." She felt suddenly shy, which was ridiculous after everything they'd been through together. "Ready to face the town?" "With you?" "Yes." They rode to Redstone Valley in the brilliant morning. the horses picking their way carefully through snow that still blocked much of the road. As they descended from the high country, they could see smoke rising from chimneys, signs of life returning to normal after the storm. But there was also evidence of damage, collapsed structures, desperate activity around some ranches, the marks of hard times on hard land. "We should stop," Hannah said as they passed a neighboring ranch where men worked frantically to shore up a barn. "Offer help." Elias hesitated, old habits of isolation warring with Hannah's logic, then nodded. They turned off the main road and approached the ranch where 3 men looked up in surprise at their arrival. "Elias," one of them said, John Morrison, who owned the adjacent property. His tone was wary but not hostile. "Didn't expect to see you out." "Storm hit everyone hard," Elias said simply. "We've got our place mostly sorted. Figured you might need extra hands." Morrison's eyes shifted to Hannah, widening slightly as he recognized her. "You're still here. The bride who came last week." "Hannah Brooks," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Soon to be Hannah Crow. We're marrying this afternoon once the preacher arrives. But first, it looks like you could use help with that barn." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to process this. A woman who'd stayed past the critical 7 days. A woman who spoke with authority and offered help rather than asking for it. A woman riding beside Elias like an equal partner rather than a frightened passenger. "We could use the help," Morrison admitted finally. "Lost the whole north wall. Been working since dawn trying to get it shored up before we lose the livestock." "Then we'll help," Hannah said, already dismounting. "Elias knows construction. I'm good at following instructions and working hard. We have a few hours before we need to be back in town." They worked alongside the Morrison crew for 2 hours, Elias providing expertise on structural repairs while Hannah did the heavy lifting and material hauling without complaint. The men watched her covertly at first, clearly amazed by her competence and stamina, then gradually accepted her presence as they would any capable worker. By the time they finished the emergency repairs, Morrison's attitude had shifted noticeably. "Appreciate the help," he said, shaking Elias's hand with something approaching genuine warmth. "Wouldn't have gotten it done without you both. And congratulations on the wedding." "Thank you," Hannah said. "We're neighbors now. That means something, or it should. We help each other. That's how communities survive." Morrison nodded slowly. "You might be right about that. If you need anything, supplies, extra hands for work, you let me know." It was a small opening, but an opening nonetheless. As they rode toward town, Elias was quiet, processing what had just happened. "You did that deliberately," he said finally. "Of course I did. First impressions matter, and I wanted them to see that I'm useful, that I contribute, that I'm not some delicate thing who'll break at the first hardship." Hannah glanced at him. "Was I wrong to do it?" "No, you were brilliant." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You claimed your place. Our place. Without asking permission or waiting for acceptance. You just took it. That's how it works. You can't wait for people to invite you to belong. You have to show them you already do." Redstone Valley came into view, and Hannah felt her stomach tighten with nerves. This was different from helping at a ranch. This was walking into the town that had watched 3 women flee, walking in as the one who stayed, claiming her position publicly. They rode down Main Street at mid-morning, and activity stopped just as it had a week ago. People emerged from shops and houses, drawn by the sight of Elias Crow and his bride, still there, still together, on their wedding day. Sheriff Garrett stepped out of his office, his expression complicated. Martha Chen appeared on the boarding house porch, surprise evident on her weathered face. Others gathered in small groups, whispering, staring, waiting to see what would happen next. Elias and Hannah dismounted in front of the general store. Before going in, Hannah turned to face the watching crowd. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice carried in the quiet morning air. "Good morning. For those who don't remember, I'm Hannah Brooks, soon to be Hannah Crow, as Elias and I are marrying this afternoon when the preacher arrives. We're here for supplies and to offer help to anyone who needs it after the storm. We're your neighbors, and we take that seriously. We're part of this community, whether you like it or not." The bluntness of it shocked several people into motion. Martha Chen recovered first, coming down off the porch with purposeful steps. "Child, you actually stayed," she said, and there was respect in her voice now rather than pity. "Through that storm, too. How bad was it up at the ranch?" "Bad enough. Lost some cattle, damaged buildings, but we managed." Hannah met the older woman's eyes steadily. "We managed together. As partners." Martha's gaze shifted to Elias, assessing him with new eyes. "You brought her back to help Morrison. Heard about it from his boy who wrote in earlier. That was good of you both." "Neighbors help neighbors," Hannah said simply. "That's how it should work." Others were drifting closer now, curiosity overcoming hesitation. Sheriff Garrett approached, tipping his hat to Hannah. "Miss Brooks, congratulations on your upcoming nuptials and on surviving your first week in high country during a storm." There was a question in his tone, an invitation to explain how she'd managed what others hadn't. "Sheriff Garrett," Hannah acknowledged. "It wasn't survival. It was work. Good, hard, necessary work. The kind that builds something worth having." "And you found that worth having with Elias here?" Another test, seeing if she'd defend him publicly. "I found a man who's honest, capable, and willing to treat me as an equal partner. That's worth more than comfort or social standing or any of the other things people told me I should want." She looked around at the gathered crowd. "I know 3 women came before me and left. I know you all expected the same from me, but I'm not them. I'm here to stay, to work, to build a life with my husband on our ranch. And we're going to be good neighbors, whether you're ready for that or not." The silence that followed was heavy with reassessment. These people had known Elias for years as a distant, defensive figure. Now they were seeing him through Hannah's eyes, as a partner, a neighbor, a man worthy of respect and loyalty. It challenged their assumptions. Martha Chen broke the silence with a short laugh. "Well, you've got spine, I'll give you that. And maybe that's what was needed all along, someone who could match him strength for strength." "That's exactly what was needed," Hannah agreed. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have supplies to purchase and a wedding to prepare for." Inside the general store, the proprietor, a round man named Tucker, served them with barely concealed fascination. Word had clearly spread about their stop at Morrison's ranch, and he peppered them with questions about the storm damage while tallying their supplies. "Heard you worked alongside John's crew like you'd been doing it all your life," Tucker said to Hannah. "I grew up doing similar work. It's not complicated if you pay attention and work hard." "And you're really marrying him? Today? For real?" Tucker glanced at Elias nervously. Hannah's voice went cold. "Yes, I'm really marrying him. Elias Crow is an honest, hardworking man who's built a successful ranch through his own effort and intelligence. I'm fortunate he was willing to take a chance on me, so yes, for real, with full commitment and no reservations." Tucker flushed. "Didn't mean any offense, ma'am." "Then don't offer any. We're customers. We're neighbors. Treat us with the same courtesy you'd offer anyone else." They left the store with their supplies and walked toward the small church where the preacher was already waiting, having arrived on the morning stage. Word had spread, and a small crowd had gathered. Not hostile exactly, but intensely curious about this wedding that was actually going to happen. The preacher was an elderly man named Reverend Walsh, who traveled a circuit through the mountain communities. He'd officiated the wedding attempts with Catherine and Margaret, both of which had ended before vows were exchanged. He looked at Elias and Hannah with cautious hope. "You're certain about this?" he asked Hannah privately before they entered the church. "There's no shame in changing your mind. Better to know now than regret it later." "I'm certain," Hannah said firmly. "I know exactly what I'm choosing and why. I'm ready." "Then let's make it official." The ceremony was simple, conducted in the small church with a handful of witnesses. Sheriff Garrett attended, as did Martha Chen and the Tuckers. John Morrison had ridden in and stood at the back, his presence a silent statement of acceptance. The words were traditional, the vows unchanged for generations, but when Hannah and Elias spoke them, they carried weight beyond ritual. "I, Hannah Brooks, take you, Elias Crow, to be my husband, to work beside you, to build with you, to face whatever comes with honesty and strength. I, Elias Crow, take you, Hannah Brooks, to be my wife, to respect you as my partner, to trust you with my life, to create something lasting together." When the Reverend pronounced them married, Elias kissed Hannah for the first time, gentle, respectful, but unmistakably real. The small audience applauded, some more enthusiastically than others, and suddenly it was done. Hannah Brooks had become Hannah Crow, and the impossible had happened. A woman had stayed. Not just stayed, but claimed her place with such force and clarity that the town couldn't ignore or dismiss it. After the ceremony, Martha Chen approached with surprising warmth. "You'll need to come to the next town social. Let people get to know you properly. Can't build community hiding up on that ranch." "We'll come," Hannah promised. "And you're welcome to visit us. See what we're building." "Might just do that," Martha said. "Might just do that." As they prepared to leave town, supplies loaded, legally married, Sheriff Garrett pulled Elias aside. "You got lucky with this one," he said quietly. "She's strong, capable. She'll be good for you and for the community." "I know," Elias said. "I'm just trying to deserve it. Keep treating her like you have been, like a partner, like she matters, and you'll do fine." The sheriff glanced at Hannah, who was accepting congratulations from several townspeople with grace and warmth. "She's changing things already, the way people look at you. Give it time, and she might change everything." On the ride back to the ranch, now legally theirs together, Hannah was quiet. Elias glanced at her several times, trying to read her mood. "Regrets?" he finally asked. She turned to him, and her smile was radiant. "Not a single one. You?" "None. Just amazed it actually happened. That you're really here. Really mine. Yours and mine both. Partners, remember?" But she said it with warmth, understanding what he meant. "We did it, Elias. We made it through the 7 days, through everything people said was impossible, and now we build on that foundation." The ranch appeared ahead, looking different somehow now that it was officially theirs together. Elias helped Hannah dismount, but before they could enter the house, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I want to do this properly," she said. And before he could ask what she meant, she'd opened the door and was waiting expectantly. Understanding dawned. Elias bent and lifted her. She was solid and strong, no delicate burden, and carried her across the threshold of their home. Hannah laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed him as he set her down inside. "Now it's real," she said. "Now it's truly home." They spent the rest of the day settling into their new reality as husband and wife. The work didn't change. There were still animals to tend, repairs to make, supplies to organize. But everything felt different now, weighted with permanence and possibility. This wasn't two strangers trying to figure out if partnership would work. This was two people committed to making it work, no matter what challenges came. That evening, they sat together going over plans for the coming months. Spring planting, cattle breeding decisions, repairs to complete, improvements to attempt. Hannah had ideas that built on Elias's experience, creating something neither could have achieved alone. "We're going to make this ranch into something remarkable," Hannah said, making notes in the ledger. "Not just surviving, but thriving, showing everyone what's possible when people work together instead of competing or isolating." "Ambitious." "Of course. What's the point of doing anything if you're not reaching for something better?" Elias watched her work, this woman who'd walked into his life 7 days ago and transformed everything. She'd survived every test, passed every challenge, and chosen to stay not despite the hardship, but because of the honesty underneath it. "Hannah," he said, and she looked up from her notes. "Thank you for taking the chance, for seeing something in this place and in me worth building on." She set down her pencil and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in both of hers. "Elias, I didn't take a chance on you. I made a calculated decision based on evidence and logic. You showed me exactly who you are through your letters, your honesty, your actions. I knew what I was choosing, and every day since has confirmed I chose well. Still, it took courage. It took courage from both of us. Courage to try again after failure, courage to be honest when pretending would be easier, courage to build something real in a world that rewards facades." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We're brave together. That's our strength." As night fell on their wedding day, they settled into the house that was now legally theirs, bound together by law and commitment and 7 days of brutal honesty. The town had witnessed their marriage. The land had tested them and found them worthy. And they'd found in each other something precious and rare, genuine partnership built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch wouldn't run itself. The community wouldn't accept them overnight. The work would never truly be finished. But they'd face it together, as they'd faced everything else since Hannah stepped off that stage 7 days ago. 7 days that changed everything. 7 days that built a foundation strong enough to last. Hannah Crow fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, in the house that was finally home, surrounded by the silence of high country and the promise of everything they'd build together. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely at peace. Winter deepened after their wedding, bringing more storms and harder work, but Hannah and Elias faced it with the confidence of people who'd already proven themselves to each other. The ranch became their shared project in ways that went beyond the practical division of labor they'd established in those first 7 days. Hannah didn't just help with the work, she transformed it, bringing efficiency and innovation that multiplied their effectiveness. By mid-January, word had spread through the valley about the bride who'd stayed, the woman who worked beside her Half-Apache husband like she'd been born to it. Neighbors who'd avoided Elias for years started finding reasons to stop by, ostensibly to borrow tools or ask advice about their own storm damage, but really to see this phenomenon for themselves. Hannah greeted each visitor with the same practical warmth, offering coffee and conversation, never hiding the reality of their life, but also never apologizing for it. "You're changing things," Elias said one evening after the Morrisons had left following their 3rd visit in as many weeks. "The way people see this place. See me." Hannah looked up from the sewing she'd taken up, mending work clothes by lamplight. "I'm not changing anything. I'm just showing them what was always there. You built something worth respecting here. They just needed someone to make them look at it properly." "They respect you. That's different. They respect us. Together. That's the point." She set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him at the table where he was updating the ranch books using the system she'd taught him. "Elias, you've spent so long being defensive, proving yourself to people who'd already decided not to see you clearly. I don't have that history. So when I show them partnership, competence, a working ranch, they have to actually look. And once they look, they see you differently too." He studied her face in the lamplight, this woman who'd walked into his life 2 months ago and quietly revolutionized everything. "You make it sound like strategy." "It is strategy. Good strategy. I told you I'm good at positive interactions when I choose to be. I'm choosing to be good at them because it serves our interests and because it's right. Community matters. Isolation might have protected you before, but it was also limiting you. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with being a social project." Hannah laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're not a project, we are. This ranch, this life, this partnership, it's all one connected thing. And part of making it sustainable is making sure we have relationships beyond just each other. We need neighbors we can trust, trading partners who deal fairly, a community that functions when times get hard." She was right, as she usually was about such things. Elias had learned to trust her judgment on matters of community and relationship, just as she'd learned to trust his on matters of land and livestock. They complemented each other in ways that strengthened both. February brought a thaw that revealed the full extent of winter's damage. Fences down across 3 pastures, erosion along the creek that would need addressing before spring runoff, the chicken coop roof that had held through the storms but now needed replacing entirely. The list of spring work was daunting, even looking at it together. "We'll need help," Hannah said, surveying the damaged fence line on a clear, cold morning. "This is too much for 2 people to handle before cattle need to be moved to spring pasture. I usually manage alone. Usually you have more time and fewer competing priorities. But this year we're also planting a proper vegetable garden, improving the barn ventilation system, and expanding the root cellar. We can't do everything." She turned to him, her gray eyes thoughtful. "What about a work party? Invite the neighbors, provide food and drink. Get the big projects done in a few days instead of weeks." Elias felt the old resistance rising. "They won't come. Not for me. They'll come for us. And they'll come because we helped Morrison and we'll help others too. That's how community works. Reciprocal obligation. We give, they give, everyone benefits." He wanted to argue, but he'd learned that when Hannah used that particular tone, calm, logical, absolutely certain, she'd already thought through every objection. When? Early March, before spring work gets fully underway. I'll talk to Martha Chen next time we're in town. She knows everyone, knows who's good at what. Between her knowledge and our organization, we can get people here. The work party happened on a Saturday in early March, and to Elias's amazement, people came. The Morrisons arrived first with their 2 grown sons, followed by 3 other neighboring ranchers with their families. Even Sheriff Garrett rode up, explaining he had the day off and hands that worked as well as anyone's. Martha Chen came too, bringing several women from town and enough food to feed an army. Hannah had organized everything with military precision. She'd divided the work into clear projects, assigned teams based on skills, and created a rotation so everyone got breaks and food. She moved between groups offering encouragement, solving problems, making people feel valued for their contributions. Elias watched her with something approaching awe. This was a side of her he'd glimpsed but never seen fully deployed. Her ability to bring people together, to create cooperation where before there'd been only isolation. By day's end, the fence lines were repaired, the chicken coop had a new roof, and foundation work was done for the root cellar expansion. More than that, something had shifted in how people interacted with Elias. They joked with him, asked his opinion on their own ranch problems, included him in conversations about valley politics and upcoming events. Hannah had been right, giving them a reason to see him differently, to interact with him in a context of mutual benefit rather than suspicion, changed everything. As people prepared to leave, John Morrison approached Elias with unexpected seriousness. "You've got something good here, Crow. The ranch, the setup, and especially the wife. Don't take it for granted." "I don't. Believe me, I don't." "Good. Because she's the kind of woman who makes a place better just by being there, and that's rare." Morrison glanced to where Hannah was laughing with several of the valley women, completely at ease. "She's changed how people see you, given you a fresh start in a way. Don't waste it." "I won't." After everyone left, Elias and Hannah stood on the porch watching the last wagon disappear down the valley road. The ranch looked different now, cared for by more hands than just theirs, connected to the community in visible ways. "You were right," Elias said quietly, "about all of it. The work party, the community building, how people would respond. I'm not always right, but I'm good at reading people and situations, and I knew this could work if we did it correctly." She leaned against him, tired but satisfied. "We're not isolated anymore, Elias. We're part of something larger, and that makes us stronger, not weaker. I never thought I'd have this, community, acceptance. You always deserved it. You just needed someone to show them how to see it." She looked up at him, her face serious now. "But here's the thing. We can't stop. Community is like a garden. It needs tending, consistent care, attention. We have to keep showing up, keep helping, keep being present. Otherwise, it withers back to nothing." "You make it sound like work." "It is work. Good work. Important work. But work nonetheless, just like everything else worth having." Spring arrived in earnest, bringing the explosive growth and constant labor that defined the season. Hannah threw herself into planting her vegetable garden, turning a bare patch of earth into organized rows of potential. Elias watched her work with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, planning crop rotation and companion planting like she was orchestrating a symphony. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked one afternoon, watching her stake tomato plants with careful precision. "My father. He believed in food independence and knowing how to produce what you need. After he died and I moved to Kansas City, I missed it terribly. The connection to earth, to seasons, to real growth." She sat back on her heels, surveying her work with satisfaction. "This might be my favorite part of ranch life, watching things grow because of your care and attention. The cattle don't appeal to you the same way. The cattle are necessary and interesting, but they're not the same as this. This is creation, bringing abundance from careful planning and work. It feels," she searched for the word, "it feels like hope made visible." Elias understood that. He'd felt similarly when he first started building the ranch, when each completed structure represented possibility rather than just shelter. Hannah was doing the same thing, but with plants instead of boards, creating tangible evidence that their life here could be abundant rather than merely adequate. By June, the garden was flourishing beyond even Hannah's expectations. The root cellar, expanded and improved, was already filling with preserved foods. The ranch book showed better numbers than Elias had seen in 5 years of operation. And Hannah's belly was beginning to swell with the child they'd created together in the quiet privacy of winter nights. She'd suspected for weeks before she was certain, her body changing in subtle ways only she noticed initially. When she finally told Elias, he'd gone very still, his dark eyes unreadable. "Are you happy about it?" she'd asked, suddenly uncertain despite all the intimacy they'd built. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His voice had been rough with emotion. Terrified, amazed, grateful, but happy most of all. "You're giving me a family, Hannah, a real family." "We're creating a family," she'd corrected. "Together, like everything else." Now, as summer heat built and her pregnancy became obvious, Hannah felt the final pieces of her new life settling into place. The town women, who'd been cautiously friendly before, became genuinely warm, offering advice and hand-sewn baby clothes, including her in the community of mothers in a way that cemented her belonging. The men treated Elias with new respect, not just as a capable rancher, but as a family man, someone building a legacy rather than just surviving. Martha Chen visited regularly now, ostensibly to check on Hannah's pregnancy, but really, Hannah suspected, because she enjoyed their company. One afternoon in late July, sitting on the porch shelling peas while Hannah rested in the shade, Martha addressed what everyone had been thinking but not saying. "You know the whole valley's talking about you two," Martha said, her hands working with practiced efficiency. "About how you made it when the others didn't. People have theories." "Let me guess," Hannah said with amusement. "I'm stronger, tougher, more adaptable." "Some of that, but also that you and Elias actually suit each other in a way the others never did, like you were built for the same kind of life." Martha glanced at her shrewdly. "Is that true?" Hannah considered this, one hand resting on her swelling belly. "I think we were both looking for the same thing: honesty, partnership, purpose. The others were looking for different things. Catherine wanted comfort in society. Margaret wanted someone she could remake into her ideal. Louise wanted security without having to truly commit to this place. None of those were bad wants, but they weren't compatible with what Elias could offer. And what you wanted was compatible. What I wanted was exactly what Elias offered: a hard life built on truth, a partner who respected me, work that mattered. We aligned from the beginning. The 7 days just proved we could actually function together under pressure." Martha nodded slowly. "You're good for him. But I think he's good for you too. You're different from when you arrived, more confident, more at peace." "I am at peace. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I should be doing. That's a rare gift." As summer progressed into fall, the ranch's success became increasingly visible. The cattle were healthy and multiplying. The garden produced abundance that Hannah preserved with skill, learned from childhood, and refined through practice. The house itself had changed, transformed from a sparse bachelor dwelling into a real home, with curtains Hannah had sewn, furniture Elias had built during winter evenings, small touches of comfort that made the space welcoming without sacrificing its essential character. In September, with Hannah's pregnancy advanced but not yet limiting, they hosted a harvest celebration. It had been Hannah's idea, a way to thank everyone who'd helped through the year, to celebrate the season's success, to continue building the community connections that had become so valuable. Nearly 40 people came, filling the ranch with laughter and music and the kind of easy fellowship that Elias had never imagined possible in his isolated life. Late in the evening, after most guests had left and only close neighbors remained, John Morrison raised his glass in a toast. "To Elias and Hannah Crow. You've shown us all what's possible when people build something real together. Here's to your continued success and to the family you're creating." The others echoed the sentiment, and Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. These people, who'd been strangers less than a year ago, who'd viewed her husband with suspicion and her with skepticism, had become genuinely important to their lives. They'd become community, support, the kind of social fabric that made hard living sustainable. "Thank you," she said when she could trust her voice. for giving us a chance, for seeing past old prejudices, for becoming our friends. This ranch, this life, it's so much better because of all of you." Elias's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. He didn't speak. He rarely did in large groups, but his eyes said everything his voice couldn't. Gratitude, wonder, a sense of having found something he'd stopped believing possible. October brought the first serious cold, a reminder that another winter was coming. But this time, preparation felt different. They had community support if things went badly. They had a full root cellar and livestock in good condition. They had experience from the previous winter to guide their decisions. Most importantly, they had each other, their partnership now tested and proven through a full cycle of seasons. Hannah's pregnancy was advancing rapidly now, her body growing heavy with the child they'd made. Elias had become almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing heavy work, despite her protests that she was pregnant, not fragile. "The baby is fine," she said one afternoon when he'd tried to stop her from carrying water to the garden. "I'm fine. Women have been doing physical work while pregnant since the beginning of time. Not my wife, not my child." She softened at that, understanding the fear underneath his protectiveness. "Elias, I promise I'll be careful. I promise I'll stop if something feels wrong. But I also need you to trust me to know my own body, my own limits. Agreed?" "Agreed. But I'm allowed to worry." "You're allowed to worry. Just not allowed to turn me into an invalid." November brought the first major snowfall, and with it, a test of everything they'd built. Hannah went into labor on a night when snow was falling thick and fast, the familiar pattern of winter storms settling over the valley. Elias, trying to remain calm despite the terror clawing at his chest, rode through the darkness to fetch Martha Chen, who'd agreed months ago to attend the birth. Martha arrived within 2 hours, efficient and unflappable, turning the bedroom into a birthing room with practiced ease. She sent Elias out of the room. "This is women's work, and you'll just be in the way," leaving him to pace the main room while Hannah labored through the long night. The sounds that came from the bedroom terrified him. Hannah's pain, her cries that she tried to muffle, the low, urgent voices of Martha and the other valley women who'd arrived to help. He'd faced storms and wild animals and the isolation of years alone, but nothing had prepared him for this, the woman he loved suffering while he could do nothing to help. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard it, a thin, outraged wail that cut through the house like lightning. His child. His and Hannah's child, alive and protesting their arrival into the cold world. Martha emerged moments later, smiling despite her exhaustion. "You have a daughter, Elias, strong and healthy and loud, like her mother." He stumbled into the bedroom to find Hannah propped against pillows, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up when he entered, and her smile transformed everything. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. The baby was impossibly small, impossibly perfect, with a shock of dark hair and skin the color of honey, a perfect blend of both parents. When Elias touched her tiny hand, she gripped his finger with surprising strength, and something in his chest cracked open, flooding him with more emotion than he'd known he could contain. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice breaking. "Like you." "She's ours," Hannah corrected, "built from both of us, perfect because of it." They named her Sarah, after Hannah's mother, and she became the final piece that transformed the ranch from a successful operation into a true home. The Valley women brought gifts and advice, the men offered awkward congratulations and genuine pleasure, and suddenly Elias and Hannah weren't just the couple who'd made it work, they were a family, with all the weight and wonder that implied. Winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant work, but it was different from the previous winter. Where before they'd been 2 people proving themselves, now they were 3 people simply living. Sarah grew rapidly, achieving the small milestones that delighted Hannah and amazed Elias. Her first smile, her first time sleeping through the night, the way she tracked movement with increasingly aware eyes. By the time spring arrived again, Sarah was sitting up, reaching for things, beginning to show personality that was all her own. Hannah had returned to full work on the ranch, carrying Sarah in a sling while she tended the garden or did lighter chores, never letting motherhood completely separate her from the partnership she and Elias had built. One afternoon in April, almost exactly a year and a half after Hannah had first arrived, They stood together on the porch, watching spring green emerge across the valley. Sarah was asleep against Hannah's shoulder, her small, warm weight a constant reminder of everything they'd created. "Do you ever think about how this all started?" Hannah asked. 7 days. That's all we gave ourselves to decide if partnership was possible. I think about it often. How close we came to not making it. If you'd been like the others, if you'd been frightened or disappointed or unable to see past surface things. If you'd been like my first husband, if you'd been dishonest or controlling or unable to respect me as an equal. She shifted Sarah slightly, pressing a kiss to her daughter's dark hair. So many ways it could have failed, but it didn't. Because we were both willing to be honest, to work hard, to build something real instead of settling for comfortable illusions. "The town still talks about you," Elias said with amusement. "The woman who survived Elias Crow. They make it sound like I'm some kind of trial to be endured." "You are a trial, just a worthwhile one." But she was smiling, taking the sting from the words. "Let them talk. Let them make up whatever stories they want. We know the truth, that we built this together, that it works because we both chose it with clear eyes and full hearts." Sarah stirred, making small, sleepy sounds, and Hannah swayed gently to soothe her back to sleep. Elias watched his wife and daughter, these two people who'd transformed his entire existence, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. "I love you," he said, the words still somewhat awkward but genuine. "Both of you. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I have words for." Hannah leaned against him, careful not to wake Sarah. "I know. You show it every day in how you work, how you treat us, how you've opened yourself to community and connection despite all the years of isolation and hurt. That's love made visible. And I love you too. For your honesty, your strength, your willingness to let me be fully myself. For building this life with me." As spring advanced and work picked up, they fell into patterns that were now comfortable rather than new. Neighbors stopped by regularly. The Morrison boys often helped with heavy projects in exchange for Hannah's cooking or Elias's expertise with difficult livestock. Martha Chen had become almost a grandmother figure to Sarah, visiting weekly to check on her development and share stories of the valley's history. The ranch itself flourished under their combined management. Elias's knowledge of land and livestock combined with Hannah's organizational skills and innovation created something more successful than either could have achieved alone. By midsummer, they were discussing expansion, more cattle, better breeding stock, possibly hiring seasonal help for the heaviest work periods. "We're building something that will last," Hannah said one evening, reviewing the ranch books with satisfaction. "Something Sarah can inherit if she chooses, or that we can sell for good value if she wants a different life. Either way, we're creating security, legacy, proof that what we started was worth sustaining." "You sound like you're already thinking about her future," Elias said, watching Sarah crawl energetically across the floor, investigating everything. "Of course I am. That's what parents do. Build foundations their children can use to create their own lives. We're giving her something neither of us had. A stable home, a community that accepts her, parents who work together instead of destroying each other." She closed the ledger and moved to scoop up Sarah, who'd found the wood box and was attempting to pull out logs. "That's worth every hard day, every difficult moment, building something better for her than what we inherited." As summer faded into fall and Sarah's first birthday approached, the valley organized a celebration that spoke to how thoroughly the Crows had been integrated into community life. Nearly everyone came, bearing gifts and good wishes, treating Sarah with the fond attention of people who considered her one of their own. During the celebration, Sheriff Garrett pulled Elias aside with unusual seriousness. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "For years, I made assumptions about you based on your heritage, your isolation, the failed marriage attempts. I judged you unfairly. That was the past. Let me finish." Garrett held up a hand. "I was wrong. You're one of the best men in this valley. Honest, hardworking, a good husband and father, a neighbor people can rely on. Hannah saw that immediately. Took the rest of us longer, but we see it now. And I'm sorry it took so long." Elias absorbed this, the formal acknowledgement of prejudice and subsequent change. "Thank you for saying it, and for giving us a chance to prove ourselves." You proved more than yourselves. You proved what's possible when people look past surface things to see what actually matters. Garrett glanced to where Hannah was laughing with a group of valley women, Sarah on her hip. You built something remarkable here. Don't ever forget that. That night, after everyone had left and Sarah was asleep in her cradle, Elias and Hannah sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. The ranch was quiet around them, settled into the peaceful rhythms of evening. "A year and a half ago," Hannah said softly, "I stepped off a stage in Redstone Valley thinking I was taking a calculated risk on a practical arrangement. I had no idea I was actually coming home." "You made it home. By choosing to stay, to work, to build. This place was just a ranch before you. You turned it into a home." "We turned it into a home together. That's the whole point, isn't it? That together we could create something neither of us could have managed alone." Elias took her hand, lacing their work-roughened fingers together. "The 7 days," he said. "That first week when everyone expected you to leave. Do you remember what you were thinking when you decided to stay?" "I remember thinking that you were the first person in years who saw me clearly and valued what they saw. That the work was hard but honest. That building something real was worth any amount of difficulty." She turned to look at him, her gray eyes reflecting starlight. "I remember deciding that I'd rather have 1 year of truth with you than a lifetime of comfortable lies with anyone else. And now, almost 2 years later, now I know I was right. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth it to build this life, this family, this home. I'd choose you again, Elias, every single time." He kissed her then, soft and deep, pouring into the gesture everything his limited words couldn't express. Gratitude, love, wonder at the miracle of their life together. When they pulled apart, Hannah was smiling. "Come to bed," she said. "Tomorrow brings work, and we'll need our rest." They went inside together, checking on Sarah one final time. She slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that her parents were near, before retiring to their own room. The house settled around them, solid and warm, a shelter built by honest work and sustained by genuine partnership. Outside, the valley slept under stars that had watched this land for millennia. The ranch that Elias Crow had built alone, that Hannah Brooks had chosen with clear eyes, that together they'd transformed into something remarkable, stood as proof that the hardest things were often the most worthwhile. That honesty could build what pretense never could. That partnership, real partnership between equals, could create miracles. 3 women had come before Hannah, and 3 women had fled. The town had expected the same pattern, had counted down the days until she too would break and run. But Hannah had stayed, not because she endured Elias Crow, but because together they built a life worth staying for. The whispers never completely stopped. Small towns had long memories and enjoyed their stories. But the whispers changed over time, from skepticism to admiration, from judgment to respect. The Crows became the couple that proved what was possible when people chose truth over comfort, partnership over dominance, building over maintaining. Years would pass, bringing more children, more challenges, more growth. The ranch would expand and prosper. Sarah would grow strong and capable, raised by parents who respected each other and the land they worked. The community would continue to strengthen, bound by reciprocal obligation and genuine friendship. But it all came back to those 7 days. 7 days of brutal honesty and brutal weather. 7 days of testing and choosing and building. 7 days when Hannah Brooks decided to become Hannah Crow, and in doing so, created a future neither of them could have imagined alone. The story of the mail-order bride who stayed became legend in Redstone Valley. Parents told it to their daughters as proof that strength mattered more than beauty, that choosing wisely trumped choosing safely. Young men heard it as a reminder that respect and partnership attracted the kind of women worth keeping. The valley itself claimed it as evidence of their community's ability to change, to grow, to accept what at first seemed impossible. But for Elias and Hannah, it was simply their beginning, the foundation of everything that followed. The proof that 7 days could change everything, if those 7 days were built on truth. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything they'd needed to build a home that held, through storms and seasons and all the years that followed. A home built on partnership. A home worth staying for. A home that would last.